Let's talk about making a king in your fantasy campaign. Welcome to my channel. I focus on tabletop role-playing games, video games, and science fiction. Many players love to select the Nobel background, which is described in the player's handbook on page 135, where you have wealth and power and privilege. Well, that's well and good, but there is another interesting approach to this. And that is to say, why not put the character in the line of succession so that they are somewhere in the line of succession to rule the kingdom or whatever. Most players would jump at this chance. And this is, shall we say, a very two-edged sword. Here's another interesting game that some of you may have heard of, or you've heard of the phrase kingmaker. And Wikipedia gives an interesting description about it, but this is my take, and I'm not really a good historian, but there are things about it. It's also known as the period of the time of the War of the Roses, which is a modern terminology. That wasn't what it was called. It was a civil war between the Lancastrians and I think it was York. I'm not sure how the terminology goes, but the question was that you had weak kings and powerful nobles. But the nobles were not in the line of succession. And what happened in the game of Kingmaker is not about being king. It's about the nobles who control you, making you king. So think about this political intrigue. Your character is, the third in line, or let's make him the fifth in line of some royal house. But again, we have to get to this, I think the rule is called primogeniture, which is an interesting question in the phrase of who inherits the kingdom next. Now, that has not always been this carved in stone rule that it goes by order of age. In fact, that's a fairly modern invention. It was whoever the king wanted was his successor. And if the king was dead, then it was always this challenge of who was actually the next in line, because that could be varying. You could have conflicting claims. And that's what happened in the Civil War in England, which we today call the War of the Roses, because you had the red rose and the white rose, but anyway, so that's the battle that was going on, was who was the king. And what happened was that the royal family became pawns. There are actually two competing royal families. And the reason I think about this is that they're on Stars, there's they did the White Queen, and then right now they're doing the White Princess, which is some of the interesting story. But it was that the kings were weak. Actually, the other interesting one is if you've seen the Game of Thrones series on HBO, or read the Tales of the Song of Fire and Ice, which is the name of the book series that George R. R. Martin, the first book of that series, is Game of Thrones. But they just stuck with the first, the title of the first book is the entire title of the series. And actually, I think was a good decision by HBO. But it's the challenge that you have the royal family is really not the ones in power. It's those who support them are the ones in power. Now, you don't see that much in Game of Thrones, and you don't really see that much often portrayed, but it's the people behind the kingdom. It's the ones who are manipulating the royal family. So think about this. You've got a character who says, I want to have I want to be a noble. And they go, great. You're in line for succession. You're in the royal line. And then you're playing along and he gets a message that his great uncle or whatever has passed away. And they're trying to decide who will be next in line. And they've, for whatever reason, say they were also the heir apparent was also assassinated or is no longer viewed as viable. On Showtime, they did a series called The Tudors, which is about Henry VIII and his early years. And the reason that it was so important for Henry to have a male heir, if you don't know, because you don't know the background of that, is that this is following up the civil war that put his father in power. His father started as a very weak king, very weak, and slowly was able to gain power over the years that he was on the throne, but he was extremely weak. And Henry VIII knew that if you didn't have somebody with a very strong character to come into power when he was gone, that the country could split, which is what nearly happened. It was only the fact that Elizabeth came to power and ushered in what was called the Golden Era. But the challenge was that Henry's father was a very weak king initially, and really never was that powerful even toward the end of his reign. So what happened was that Henry wanted a powerful king to succeed him. And that's why he wanted a boy. That's why it was not sexist. It was that he didn't think a queen, because up to that point in time, they had never had a queen that was that powerful. And he was based upon, what he had seen in the past. What's the phrase? The battle doesn't always go to the swift, nor the race. No, the race does not always go to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, but that's the way to bet. And Henry was betting based upon what he had seen in the past, that a queen was not going to be as powerful as a king. And if you watch some of the things about Elizabeth, the Golden Age, and some of those, you start to understand that they kept trying to marry her off because they thought she was not strong enough. And so that's what's happening from history. But if you want to introduce that, what player would you go, oh, you're actually in the line of succession? The player's going to go, oh, great. Yeah, but then what happens is that now you have people who, there are two kinds of interesting encounters that the party can run into. They can run into assassins who are there to kill somebody else who could possibly have a stake in the as king, and those who are other powerful nobles who want to capture the player character and make him their pawn. And people don't realize it's the king it has no power. Which actually, if you play chess, you realize the queen in chess is the most powerful piece, and the king as a piece that in battle is really extremely weak. He's not much more powerful than a pawn, except that he can move in all directions, and as opposed to the pawn, which can only march forward. So there's there's only one other move where they move in a slightly different direction. But the idea is that your king doesn't have the power. So if your player becomes a piece in the Game of Thrones, shall we say, that there's a whole bunch of political intrigue that can be going on. Does your player want to? He can always just retire and let some other noble take control, and really control the purse strings and control everything, and he's just living in a life of luxury, but you're in the gilded cage of the bird who can't do anything. But or do you really want to be an adventurer, which is not going to be allowed if you're in the line of succession? Because they're going to go, no, we can't have that. That could cause, what happens if you die? That throws this whole thing into doubt. So you're going to have the intrigue of people saying, no, you have to stop adventuring and go off and live in safety and security. You can't step out because, things like that. This can add whole new depth to your campaign, because now your character has to fight those who don't want him to go adventuring. To me, this is an interesting kind of political intrigue that you can add to your campaign, and most players will jump at it. They go, you want to play a noble background, and you can sort of slide it into them, because you can have had, okay, so you're not really that high up, you're of a noble family, and what happens, and then you find out that, your sister married into the noble line, and then that they got killed, and over a period of time you can slowly manipulate the story so that you suddenly, when he was so far away and so far removed from being in the royal line, and now that has changed because events in the world have caused other nobles to be killed, to be assassinated, to just get sick. Now that goes back to, it was like, I was talking about Henry VIII. He did have a son who didn't last long because he had tuberculosis. And he caught tuberculosis at an early age, and they knew he was never going to survive. So what happens is that you have this problem that other members of the royal family could be offed for various ways. Or one of them could be just declared insane. They went insane for various reasons, and they go, we can't make him king. We don't want some of the insanity that, if we go back to Rome, like Caligula was doing, who was actually Gaius Julius Caesar. I think his name was Gaius Caesar, but it was Gaius was his proper name, and Caligula means little boots. But it's because he was supported by the military. So you don't want somebody like that in power, so that people could say, even though he's, quote, in the line of succession higher than you, we're not going to let that happen. We're going to insist that somebody else take the throne, which could be extremely challenging for your player if you want to do that. So I want to hear your comments. Have you put any of your player characters as a DM? Have you actually put them in the line of succession and have introduced the problems and the challenges that could bring up? Have you had it where the character suddenly has to realize, sure, he could just say, sure, take me and let me go off, and I'll live in the gilded cage and not have to worry about anything, but then I can't be an adventurer, and I know I'm going to be always restricted in what I can do? Or do I want to be the adventurer? Gives them a reason why that, but that also means that they have to hide. You get some of that in Lord of the Rings, where the character didn't want to initially be king, and he had to embrace the destiny that was set before him. So you can add a destiny aspect to your characters. Tell me what you think about this. Love to hear your comments. Thank you for watching my video. I look forward to learning what you think about this video. Let me know in the comments below. I appreciate all your comments. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up. If you don't like the video, give me a thumbs down. I appreciate both forms of feedback. If you're new here and would like to subscribe, you can click on the icon on the left. If you're interested, there's more content on the right.